Good afternoon. My name is Richard Hill. I'm an American from the state of Michigan. You're going to learn more about me as I tell my story, so that's all there is to my introduction. I will leave time for questions at the end, so please save yours until then. I'm going to begin with a question. Have you ever had a night when you couldn't sleep? When I was 18 years old, I had several nights like that due to a burning sensation in my chest. Our longtime family doctor had retired, so I made an appointment with the guy who took over his practice. The doctor diagnosed my problem as acid reflux. Thinking stress might be the cause, he started asking me questions. Did I feel pressure to do well in school? Was I anxious about going away to college? My truthful answer to these questions was no. Looking through my medical file, the doctor came up with one more question. How do you feel about being adopted? That's usually not a hard question for an adoptee to answer, but until that very moment, I did not know that I was adopted. That accidental revelation would eventually ignite a search for my roots that spanned 3 decades. After years of false leads and dead ends, it was DNA testing that broke through secrecy, lies, and sealed records to solve the mystery of my birth. Everyone has a biological family tree, and any genealogist knows the frustration of what we call brick walls, where ancestors on the far side are unknown. For adoptees, the brick walls are a lot lower. Even our parents are unknown. Breaking through these walls is not easy. In most U.S. states, adult adoptees are denied a basic human right that everyone else takes for granted. We are not allowed to see our original birth certificates. So why did they seal our birth records? The reasoning made sense at the time. For centuries, children of unmarried mothers have been harshly labeled. Legislators wanted to protect the child from the stigma of illegitimacy. In today's society, that reasoning is completely outdated. This year, 40% of the newborns in the U.S. will be born to unwed mothers. 40%, and nobody blames the children. Adult adoptees tend to fall into 2 categories. One group is tormented by all the unanswered questions. Who was my mother? Why did she give me up? Who was my father? Do I have siblings? What is my ethnicity? What medical issues did I inherit? They're the ones most likely to search for their first families. In most cases, they aren't trying to replace their adoptive parents. They just want answers to achieve some kind of closure. You may or may not recognize Alfred E. Newman from Mad Magazine. I think his slogan, "What, me worry?" typifies adoptees in the second group. At least outwardly, they're not especially curious about their biological ancestors. Recovering from my shock in the doctor's office, I myself settled into the Alfred E. Newman camp. Only a week from going away to college, I was focused on my future. The distant past did not seem that important. It was many years later that a deathbed confession finally triggered my search. This photo shows me with my adoptive parents. I fit in nicely, and it was easy for them to pass me off as their natural child. Some people knew the truth, of course, but they kept their mouths shut in front of me, and I never suspected a thing. We don't have time to review the early part of my search, but just so you know, I did identify my birth mother. And this photo shows her at age 15. She was a very beautiful young lady. Unfortunately, when I finally learned her name, I also learned of her tragic death. While I was too late to meet my mother, I did find her other son, and he has become a great brother to me. He inherited our mother's blue eyes, and I did not, but otherwise I do see a resemblance in our childhood photos. Having identified my mother and found a brother, I could have stopped there, but I also wanted to know the identity of my birth father. After years of effort, I finally learned the name of the man my birth mother had named as my father in the adoption records. I got to meet him, and we hit it off quite well. But we decided to confirm our relationship through a DNA paternity test. Back then, you had to go to a lab and have blood drawn. Well, anyway, weeks later, we were both crushed to learn that he was not my father. I kept on searching, but the leads I found all turned out to be dead ends. Many years later, I happened to hear a genealogist friend describe the Y DNA test. Only men have a Y chromosome, and it passes down from father to son, generation after generation. Knowing that surnames usually pass down the same way from father to son, I wondered if this test could reveal the surname associated with my paternal line. I decided it was worth a try. Being cautious with my spending, I ordered a 12-marker DNA test from Family Tree DNA. Well, I got about 50 matches at the time. Great, except they had 50 different surnames. Fortunately, one of them I contacted gave me an important tip, and that was that I had to have more markers than that. So I upgraded to 37 markers. I had one perfect match, and it was to a man whose last name was Richards. Well, by then I had built a long list of men who my mother had dated, worked with, or otherwise must have known because they lived in the same small community that she did. Well, none of them stood out from the rest, but this Y-DNA test changed that. One of the men on my suspect list also had the last name Richards. Now that man was long gone, but I tracked down a niece of his who agreed to help me uncover the truth. She gave me this photo. The man my mother knew for sure was one of 5 brothers, a fact that raised a new complication. All 5 would have inherited the same Y chromosome from their common father. All 5 had been living in the same geographic area as my birth mother, so any one of them could have known her and could have passed on the Y chromosome to me. So now instead of one suspect, I had 5. And all of the men were long gone. I showed this photo to many relatives and friends. So just for fun, I'm going to do the same thing with you that I did with them. Based on appearance alone, which of these men do you think was my father? I'm going to have you make your choice now and then raise your hand when I go through that number. If you've already read my book and know the answer, please don't raise your hand. Let's just keep it to the people who don't know. Okay, if your choice is number 1, raise your hand. Right. Number 2. Can you see him? Okay, starting from the left to right. I'm sorry, the numbers are too low to show up. Starting with the guy on the left, who's number 1. If you think he looks like my father, raise your hand. Number 2. Number 3 would be in the middle. Number 4. Wow. Number 5. Okay, this is very interesting. Well, we'll see what happens, okay? My prime suspect was number 3. He actually worked with my mother, and I do think he looks like the ladies' man in the bunch. Fortunately, DNA still held the promise of an answer. Think of it this way. The children of my father would be half-siblings to me. The children of the other 4 men would be cousins to me. And half-siblings share a lot more DNA than first cousins do. So, what did I do then? Well, all I had as an option at the time was what they call a sibling test. It's a paternity test based on just 16 markers. But they try to use that to come up with a probability that 2 people are closely related. And this was all I could do at the time. Once all the results were in, the lab declared with 80% certainty that the guy in the center was my father. Well, that fit nicely with the known facts, so we finally had an answer, and I began to develop a good relationship with my newfound siblings and cousins. Since I had become an accidental pioneer, I wanted to share what I learned with other adoptees and with genealogists, so I created a website, DNAtestingadvisor.com. Well, a reporter soon found my website, and he was fascinated by my use of this testing as an adoptee to identify a birth family. So his article appeared on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I was later interviewed by some newspapers and some radio stations and so on. Oprah never called. But anyway, my website traffic jumped, and many more adoptees began to test. Now, 7 years later, there are estimates that there are at least 10,000 adoptees that have taken the major DNA tests. And if you're online in certain sites, you're finding that the reunion stories are happening almost constantly now. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg, the ones that get publicized, because in most cases, people tend to keep these things private, and they aren't in all the newspapers. But when the new, more powerful autosomal tests came out, I began to take them all so that I could tell my website visitors about them. They were very expensive initially. They were like $400 a piece. So I didn't test anyone else for a long time. And then I learned that it could be very helpful to test certain family members because it would help you sort your matches into different parts of your family tree, depending on which ones you had in common. So I asked 2 of my new paternal side relatives to test. It turns out that these new autosomal tests were great at actually measuring relationships. Unlike the old technology sibling test, they actually measure how much DNA 2 people have in common. And this table shows the typical amounts of shared DNA for various relationships. And you might notice that the amount gets cut in half at each step as you go down the table. When I was trying to identify my father, what? Can't see the bottom. I'm sorry. Basically, half-siblings should share about 25%. And first cousins should share about 12.5%. That's the key information from the table. So the first of my new relatives to submit a test was one of the guys I had identified as a first cousin. As such, we should share about 12.5% of our DNA. And he is the one I had take the 23andMe test. So I was very much expecting somewhere around 12.5%. Surprise. The amount of DNA we shared was actually more like 23%. So clearly, he and I were not related as cousins. We were half-siblings. Obviously, I was eager to see the results of my presumed sister, and she did the family finder test. Now, years earlier, that sibling test had convinced us that her father was my father. But for that to be true, she and I would have to share about 25% of our DNA on this test. Sure enough, clearly identified her as a first cousin. And while this test reports DNA in a unit called centimorgans, it works out to about 13%. She's right in that first cousin range. So I was now certain which of the 5 brothers had been my father. But when I told the man's daughter about it, she had trouble believing it, so she wanted me to test her too. Okay, we did. And sure enough, it confirmed her as my half-sibling. So she accepted the new findings, and my search was over. This was more than a bit awkward. For 5 years, we had all believed that the guy in the middle had been my father. Now I knew for sure it was this guy. The few of you who chose number 1 can say you were right all along. And number 4 would have been another uncle of mine. Anyway, I now have proof, and it's good that the entire family has accepted this, and I did have to do a lot of explaining as to why the old test was wrong and the new tests were right, but they finally got it. And it really didn't change much. Family members that find each other at our age. Some of my new relatives lived in Michigan, same state as me. Some of them lived 1,000 miles away in Texas. So it always had been that FaceTime, actual time together, was based more on geography than the actual relationship. So everything has worked out very well. In fact, we're hosting the family reunion at my home later this summer. So this is a picture of my biological father as a young man, and there's one of me at roughly the same age. Now, comparisons like this are meaningful in your family, so you can imagine how special this is for an adoptee to be able to see photos like this. There's one key lesson from my story. I had interviewed many people who knew this man and my birth mother very well, and not one person ever put the two of them together. So it looks like they had some kind of a relationship, probably very brief from what we think, but whatever, it was a secret that they both took to their graves. And yet decades later, this comes out because of the fact, the power of genetic genealogy. The answers are in their descendants. So now that you know a few highlights of my story, I want to show you a picture of my real parents. And I don't mean to confuse you, but I do want to make a point. Without any biological connection whatsoever, Harold and Thelma Hill were the ones who were there for me day after day, year after year. And they loved me as much as any parent can love a child. So when I use the terms mom and dad, I'm talking about them. On the other hand, my first parents did pass on the DNA of my ancestors, which predetermined various things about me. So they are real parents too. In truth, we are all products of nature and nurture. But with adoptees, it's just more obvious because these two factors come from 4 different people. Well, one thing my experience should teach us is that With DNA testing, surprises are possible. Can you read that way in the back? I'm going to read it to you just because it's hard to see in the back. It says, "The bad news, Mr. Piglet, is that your stuttering is genetic. The good news is all that DNA testing helped us determine who your father is." If you can't see the photo at the bottom, it's Porky Pig. And if you don't know who Porky Pig is, you can Google it. Okay, to help you see what my DNA accounts look like today, I'm going to share a few screenshots. In all of these images, I have blanked out the names of my matches to protect their privacy. Now we'll begin with my Y-DNA matches at FamilyTree.com, FamilyTreeDNA. Okay, I have tested all the way to 111 markers, but I'm showing you my matches at 37 markers. The first man on the list with a genetic distance of 0 is the man whose last name is Richards, who was my first close match and is the one who gave me the important clue as to my birth father's surname. As more men have tested, I now have 7 matches with the Richards surname. One of the great things about Y-DNA testing at FamilyTreeDNA is the ability to join or even create surname or other projects for free. There are more than 8,000 of them run by volunteer administrators. And this is where the DNA meets the paper trails in a collaborative effort. This is a small section of one chart in the Richards project that I manage. The colored bars separate the members into different subgroups where the marker values are similar, and I am actually part of the 4th group. Now, a lot of American surnames have British roots, yet many of us can only trace our paternal lines to the American colonies. My Richards line, for example, is brick-walled in 1742 Virginia. We need our British cousins to do a Y-DNA test. And you can do that here at the FamilyTreeDNA stand. The price for the 37 marker test has been reduced for this event to 100 pounds. But before you test, be sure to stop at the stand for the International Society of Genetic Genealogy, ISOGG. And it's just kind of over there, just outside this room. Many of these surname projects are so eager for you to test that they have donated their personal funds to pay for your Y-DNA test if you have the rights, if you're a man with the right surname and the right pedigree, and have a sufficient pedigree to meet the paper trail requirements. My Richards surname is one of them. Anybody here have a surname Richards in your family? Yeah, darn. We need you. Okay, moving on to my Family Finder page, where I have hundreds of autosomal DNA matches. This shows the top 6 matches on my list. My son is the closest match and shares 45% of my DNA. I may hold a world record here. I have 4 half-siblings in a single DNA database, and they all share anywhere from 19 to 25% of their DNA with me. Here are my first few matches on 23andMe. In this database, I have my son and both of my half-brothers. Notice that I have labeled my page as Old Platform. In October 2015, 23andMe introduced a whole new online platform for showing results. This shows some of my son's DNA relatives on the new platform. Since we are looking at my son's account instead of mine, you will see that my wife and her mother also show up as matches to him. Now, people who tested somewhat recently are gradually being converted to the new platform. People like me who tested even earlier are stuck on the old platform, and at least for now, we have no idea when or if we will ever be converted to the new one. Now, here's my first few matches on the AncestryDNA test. This test came out after I had solved my personal mystery, so I don't have many close relatives there. If you and a DNA match both have trees posted on Ancestry, and you have a subscription to their service, they will automatically search your trees for common ancestors. When it finds one, you will see this familiar shaky leaf symbol. And for example, this leaf here is for a man who shares enough DNA with me to be a third cousin. So if I click on that, I see a shared ancestor hint. And if you look at that, you can trace a line through my tree that goes back to a Fletcher McGinnis and Matilda Hager, second great-grandparents to me. Well, my DNA match also descends from the same couple. And the paper trails define us as third cousins. This is the same relationship projected by our shared DNA. Now, while that does not prove that this particular couple contributed our shared DNA, it is certainly possible, or in this case, even probable. So like other hints on Ancestry, these shared ancestor hints can help focus our research. I had hoped to share in this presentation a list of my favorite third-party websites that can help you learn more and do more with your DNA matches. But it would have been impossible for you to copy down all the information at the time available. So I'm pointing out a new page on the FAQ section of my website. And that page includes more than 15 links to useful resources. If you found these pieces of my story interesting, you may want to read the whole story in my book, Finding Family, My Search for Roots, and the Secrets in My DNA. As you can see from the reviews, readers really love the book. My favorite quote is actually one at the bottom, which you probably can't see from there, but it basically said, "No dishes got washed here today," which tells me that that reader really got into the book. If you would like to get a copy, I did bring some with me. I have them over in the ISOGG booth, and they're 10 pounds, and I will be very happy to sign a book for you if you would like me to. Well, this concludes my presentation. Now, for whatever time we have available, I'm happy to take questions. And we have someone with a microphone who can go around and
Hi, I've been told that my mother's father isn't actually her father. Can I have a DNA test to prove that? I have a cousin. I haven't asked them yet, but is it possible to find out? Please.
Yes, it is possible. Certainly you could take an autosomal DNA test like Family Finder, and it would uncover people who are cousins of yours of various degrees from any branch of your family tree. And if you have the rest of your family tree pretty well documented, you can see, which ones don't make sense, and those could be from that particular line. It also may help to have someone else from the other side of your family test, because then you can look and eliminate anybody that's common to both of you, and look for the ones that are just related to you, but not that other person.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. A very interesting talk. I'm actually working with a couple of people at the moment who are in similar positions to you, but they haven't got the advantage of having had a 37-marker test confirming a likely candidate, but they do have a potential candidate for who the father or father's son may be. How would you advise approaching somebody who hasn't tested DNA, but may be a candidate to be a half-sibling or cousin of someone who's looking for their birth parent?
Well, one of the things that you can do is approach somebody on the fact that, hey, we think that our family trees are connected, and you know, I'm doing the research, and would you consider taking this test? It helps usually not to come right out and say, hey, I think your father was my father, or something like that. But lots of people are interested or helpful in genealogy. It also helps if you offer to pay for the test. Another question. One up here.
Hi, very practical question. I have my father's DNA in a tube file. Do I have to give all of it to one of these people, or can I just... How do I get a little bit of DNA out of a tube and send it to some of these people?
You say you've got DNA in a tube?
Well, my father has just passed away,
Yes.
and the funeral director asked me did I want to have a file of his DNA, and I said yes. So at some point I will have some DNA in a tube.
Okay.
Do I get one shot, or can I split that up into different?
That's a very technical question. Most of the DNA labs that are in genetic genealogy have their own system, their own test kits, and they work from those. Family Tree DNA has a booth here. There's an AncestryDNA booth here. I would suggest you talk to the people at those two and find out what they could do in that situation. It's one of the reasons the prices come down is because the technology for analyzing the DNA has gotten very powerful, and they can run a lot of samples at once, and it's all standardized. It's coming in their own kits. So this is obviously a non-standard sample, and you probably expect to pay extra, I'm sure, but at least find out from them how it could be done. You got to be very careful handling this stuff too, or you can contaminate it with your own DNA. You can contaminate it with bacteria that can eat up the DNA. But you find out about handling too, and I hope this is, you know, like in a seal tube, and it should be. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions here?
Yeah, I've got a couple of great-grandparents on different branches of my tree who were illegitimate. We've done the autosomal tests and got a whole heap of results of people with names we don't recognise. How do you go through that jigsaw process of trying to work out who might go linked with which bit of the family? Can we get to who the 3 times great-grandparent is by using some sort of comparison of the other people's results that we can see, where it shows you how many segments there are, and just try and resolve the issues that you went through but a few generations back?
Well, the most obvious thing you do with any of these DNA test results is to try to contact your matches and see if they have a family tree, and see if they, between the two of you, work together and find any common surnames, common geographic areas, you know, common time periods, and so on. There are also more technical approaches you can do, particularly with the Family Finder data, because they will break that out into chromosome by chromosome data, and you can do a thing that's too complicated to get into here, but it's called triangulation. And basically, you are looking for people who share the same segments with you and each other, because it's likely that segment came from a common ancestor. Particularly that was developed for adoptees, because a lot of times adoptees have absolutely nothing. But if an adoptee matches, let's say, 2 other people, and all 3 of them have a common match, well, maybe the adoptee doesn't have a tree, but if they do, and you can find out their common ancestor, then there's a good chance that's also the adoptee's common ancestor. So that one page I referred you to on my website has a whole bunch of links to different resources where you can learn about doing this and more. Okay.
Richard, thank you very much indeed for a most informative and eye-opening...
I'm not hearing it real well.
So thank you very much indeed for a informative and eye-opening. Just a quick question. This person explains that well, you might have a man the right chromosome is inherited.
Well, first of all, only men have it. You know, men have the sex chromosomes X and Y, and women have 2 X's. So, but if you're a woman and you want to trace your paternal line, well, there's a lot of choices for you to get somebody to take that test. If you have a brother, a father, one of your father's brothers, you know, if you just kind of look through and think about it, you're just trying to find a male that goes right up that same paternal line. So lots of women are involved in this. They just have to have a stand-in to with a Y chromosome. The autosomal testing is anybody can do it, and it can find ancestors from any side or any branch of your family tree. The difference with that kind of DNA is that's the kind that recombines in every generation, and it keeps getting cut in half at each generation. So you can only go back maybe 5, 6 generations, and then things start dropping off. And even though you and somebody else do have a common ancestor that far back, you may not have happen to still have enough common DNA to show up on the test. So it's, I refer to that as broad but shallow, where the Y DNA is narrow but deep. That can go back hundreds or thousands of years. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. And as I said, I will be over in the ISOGG booth in a few minutes. If you'd like to get a book and have me sign it, I'd be happy to do it. Thank you.